Single mom waitress deliberately spilled coffee on a mafia boss. He froze when he found out why. Lamps shone faintly through the mist, their light shimmering on the puddles that lined the cracked cobblestones. In a small, dim cafe at the edge of the city's oldest district, the scent of roasted coffee and baked bread mingled with the sharp tang of wet stone outside. Alara moved behind the counter, her sleeves rolled up, her movements careful but practiced. She had been working at this cafe for nearly 3 years, and every day felt the same, a blur of orders, cups, and small conversations. But today was different. Today, she had a purpose. Her son, Theo, sat in a corner booth, coloring with a pencil stub he had found in the drawer. His small brow was furrowed in concentration, but every now and then he glanced toward her with a shy, nervous smile. Alara's heart clenched. The city was not kind, and she knew danger walked its streets freely. Protecting Theo was her first priority, always. The bell above the door jingled, cutting through the low murmur of customers. Alara glanced up instinctively. He entered like a shadow moving through the light. Lucian. Even the air seemed to bend around him. Tall, impeccably dressed, with sharp eyes that missed nothing, he had a presence that silenced the cafe for a heartbeat. Men in the city whispered his name, women looked away nervously, and even the regulars instinctively lowered their voices. He was a man of power, fear, and respect, a force that could crush lives without lifting a finger. Alara's hands stilled. Her chest tightened. Her coffee cup felt heavy in her grip. He approached the counter, his gaze scanning the room with a predator's precision. When his eyes finally settled on her, something inside her shifted. It wasn't fear. It was a memory, a bitter, aching memory she had carried for years. And with it came resolve. Lucian raised an eyebrow, a faint smirk on his lips as if he could sense the storm behind her calm demeanor. "Coffee. Black," he said, his voice smooth, measured. There was no kindness in it, only authority. Alara nodded, keeping her hands steady. Coming right up. She poured the coffee, her mind working faster than her heartbeat. She knew what she had to do, not out of recklessness, not out of hatred, but for justice, for the past, and for Theo. She lifted the cup, her hand trembling slightly, and moved toward him. The world seemed to slow around her, the clatter of cups, the chatter of customers, the rain tapping against the window, all faded into a blur. And then she spilled it. Coffee sloshed over the edge of the cup, dark and steaming, dripping onto Lucian's tailored coat. The cafe fell silent. Theo gasped, his small hand clutching his coloring book. Lucian froze. His eyes widened slightly, not in shock but in recognition. He looked at her as if he were seeing her for the first time, really seeing her. Alara didn't flinch. She met his gaze directly, her voice calm but firm. "I'm sorry," she said softly, though the apology was meaningless. It was an act, a spark meant to ignite something far bigger than spilled coffee. Lucian's fingers curled slightly, holding the edge of the counter. He didn't reach for her, didn't shout. Instead, he studied her as if trying to read a story written in her very bones. And maybe he did. "You," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. "Why?" Alara swallowed, forcing herself to speak. "Because you have something I need answers about, and I will do whatever it takes to protect my son." Theo's small voice interrupted, trembling. "Mom, please," she knelt, gathering him close. "It's okay, Theo, just stay here." Lucian's gaze flicked between them, and for the first time there was no smirk. There was only something ancient, something unspoken, a pause heavy with history, loss, and a weight neither of them fully understood yet. The cafe's other patrons shifted uneasily, sensing the tension, though they could not name its source. Alara felt it in her bones. This was no ordinary man, and she was no ordinary woman. Lucian finally straightened, shaking the droplets of coffee from his coat as if the act of spilling it had shaken him awake from a long slumber. "You are brave or foolish," he said. "I cannot decide which." Alara's lips pressed into a thin line. "I don't have time to be brave. I have to be smart." He regarded her silently for a long moment, the kind of silence that fills a room with electricity. Then he did something unexpected. He smiled, not cruelly, not gently, but a small, knowing smile that suggested he understood more than he should. "You have courage," he said finally. "I can respect that, but do you understand what you've done? That spilling this coffee, it changes everything." Alara's stomach tightened. She had hoped it would. "I understand perfectly." Lucian leaned back slightly, studying her again. "Then tell me, why now? Why here?" The question hung between them like smoke. Alara's heart raced. If she told him, everything would change, but she had already chosen. "Because the past is not dead. And neither are the debts it left behind," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucian's expression changed. The smirk was gone. His eyes softened ever so slightly, just enough for her to see the human beneath the legend. There was recognition there, something that spoke of old wounds, old promises, and old pain. "Tell me your name," he said. "Alara," she replied. He repeated it quietly, tasting it on his tongue as if it carried weight beyond its simplicity. "Alara." Theo tugged at her sleeve, his small hand reaching for hers. "Mom, can we go home?" Alara nodded. "Soon, Theo, just a little longer." Lucian's gaze followed them, a storm of emotions flickering in his eyes. Curiosity, anger, intrigue, and something darker, something almost like longing. For a moment, he looked less like a man of power and more like a man of burdens too heavy to bear alone. "You are not what I expected," he said finally, almost to himself. "And you are not what I feared," she replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. He tilted his head, studying her, as if deciding whether to destroy her, protect her, or understand her. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "we are both about to learn who we really are." The rain outside continued to fall, relentless and silver. The city seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Alara felt it too, the sense that her life had shifted on its axis, and nothing would ever be the same. For the first time in years, she felt a spark of hope. And for the first time in as long, Lucian felt a crack in the ice around his heart, a crack that perhaps only she could reach. And then, without another word, he turned and left the cafe, his coat brushing past Theo's small chair, leaving a trail of cold air and unanswered questions. Alara watched him go, her chest tight, her mind racing. She had done it. She had confronted the man who held her past and the key to her son's future. But she knew this was only the beginning. Outside, the rain fell harder, drumming against the windows as if echoing her pulse. Somewhere in the city, Lucian's mind raced with thoughts he could not admit, with memories he had long buried, and with a sense of fate that refused to be ignored. And Alara, she returned to her counter, wiping her hands, steadying herself. She glanced at Theo, who was still quietly coloring. "This is only the start, my love," she whispered. "Only the start." The cafe door closed behind Lucian with a soft chime, leaving a silence heavier than words. And in that silence, the story had begun. The rain had stopped by morning, but the city streets were still slick and glistening, reflecting the pale light of a hesitant sun. Alara walked along the narrow cobblestone alleyways, her coat pulled tightly around her. Theo held her hand, his small fingers gripping hers like a lifeline. Though the world seemed quieter than the night before, the memory of Lucian's gaze, the intensity, the recognition, refused to leave her mind. They returned to their small apartment, a modest space filled with second-hand furniture and warmth from years of love and struggle. Theo ran ahead to his small room, leaving Alara to stare out the window at the awakening city. Something about Lucian unsettled her. Not just because of who he was, the Mafia boss feared and respected by all, but because of what she had seen in his eyes. For a brief, fleeting moment there had been understanding, recognition, and perhaps something more. She shook her head, trying to dispel the thoughts. She could not afford distraction. Theo's safety had always been her priority, and it always would be. Still, she could not deny the ache in her chest, a mixture of fear and curiosity that stirred when she thought of him. The day passed slowly. Alara worked her shift at the cafe, serving coffee, smiles, and small conversations that felt like masks over her racing mind. She could not stop thinking about Lucian, the power he carried, the danger he radiated, and the strange pull she felt toward him. She remembered the locket around her neck, hidden beneath her shirt, and the sharp ache it always brought. It was more than just a piece of jewelry. It was a memory, a connection to a past that had shaped her, and apparently tied her fate to Lucian's in ways she did not yet understand. Meanwhile, Lucian sat in his office at the heart of the city, overlooking the streets he controlled with careful precision. The morning light fell on his sharp features, but even as he managed business and power, his mind wandered back to the cafe, to the woman who had spilled coffee on him with such fearless intention. His men had whispered about her bravery, her audacity. Some had laughed, calling it foolish, others had warned him to watch closely. But he knew better. He had seen courage before, yes, but hers was different. It was born from necessity, from love, from survival. And more than that, he had felt something impossible, a crack in his own armor, a faint echo of humanity he had long buried beneath power and fear. He picked up the locket he kept in his pocket, the same one that Alara had worn around her neck. It was identical, and in it, he saw a reflection of a time he had lost, a family torn apart and promises broken by betrayal. How had it ended up with her? And why did seeing it stir something long buried inside him? Lucian's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the door opening. His lieutenant, a tall man with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor, stepped inside. "Sir, we've had reports," he said. "There's a woman asking questions near your operations. She's different. Clever, careful, but bold." Lucian's lips curved into a small, calculating smile. "I know who she is," he said quietly. "Prepare for her arrival, but do not harm her." The lieutenant raised an eyebrow. "You know her?" Lucian did not answer. He could not yet explain the pull he felt, the sense of unfinished business that tied him to her. He only knew that harming her would be a mistake he could not afford. Later that evening, Alara stepped out for a walk with Theo. The streets were quiet, the bustle of the city replaced by a soft hum of distant voices and dripping water. She needed air, clarity, a moment to think beyond her worries and fears. She had planned carefully. Meeting Lucian would be dangerous, yes, but necessary. She had questions, and the answers she sought were buried deep within the shadows of his world. As they turned a corner, she saw him, Lucian, standing in the soft light of a street lamp, his coat damp from the lingering drizzle. He did not move, did not speak. He simply watched, and she felt the weight of his gaze settle on her like a stone. "Alara," he said quietly, as if speaking her name aloud made it more real. She tightened her grip on Theo's hand. "Lucian," she replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. He stepped closer, and for the first time there was no threat in his posture, only curiosity and something deeper, something almost vulnerable. "Why did you do it?" he asked, his voice low. "Why spill the coffee?" Alara took a deep breath, her mind racing with memories she had tried to keep buried. Because I needed you to see me. Not as a waitress, not as someone insignificant. I needed you to see me as I am." Lucian studied her carefully, his sharp eyes softening for a moment. "And what is it you are?" she swallowed. "A mother who will do anything to protect her son. A woman who has carried pain and loss for too long. Someone who cannot ignore the past, even when it haunts her every step." The words hung in the air. Lucian nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "You are brave," he said finally, "and foolish, but I understand, perhaps more than you think." Alara's heart skipped. Understanding, from him, it was impossible. And yet she felt it, a strange, undeniable connection that neither of them fully understood. The moment was broken by a distant shout. Both turned toward the sound, their instincts alert. The city was dangerous, and danger could come at any time. Lucian's hand brushed against his coat, fingers tightening around a concealed object. Alara felt the tension in the air, sharp and electric. "Are you safe?" Lucian asked, his voice almost gentle though edged with warning. "I will be," she replied, though she knew the truth was uncertain. Theo tugged at her sleeve, sensing the tension. "Mom, can we go home now?" She nodded. "Yes, Theo, it's time." As they walked away, Lucian followed at a distance, his mind a storm of thoughts. She was clever, cautious, and determined. But more than that, she had a spark he could not ignore, a light in the shadows of his world. He had to know more. Days passed, and the dance between them continued. Alara watched him from afar, gathering information, testing boundaries, understanding the man behind the legend. Lucian observed her as well, intrigued by her courage and the strength she displayed, especially when she thought no one was watching. One evening, a messenger arrived at Alara's apartment, a simple envelope sealed with a symbol she recognized instantly. It was from Lucian. Inside, a note written in sharp, careful handwriting: "Meet me at the old bridge at midnight. Come alone if you dare." Alara's heart raced. This was dangerous, yes, but necessary. She could not ignore it. Questions burned inside her like fire, and the chance to find answers, even a little, was too important to pass. As night fell, she prepared quietly. Theo slept soundly, unaware of the choices she made to protect him. She left a note explaining she would be out for a while, knowing she would return soon. Every step she took toward the bridge was measured, cautious, but her resolve never wavered. The bridge stretched across the river, worn stone arches reflecting in the dark water below. Lucian was already there, his figure tall and imposing, yet there was a stillness to him, a calm that belied the danger he carried. "You came," he said simply, not a question but a statement. "I did," she replied, her voice steady. "I need answers." "And I will give them," he said, stepping closer. "But you must understand, some truths are heavier than you can imagine." Alara looked at him, feeling the weight of his words. She had lived with heavy truths all her life. She could carry more. The night was silent, except for the soft rush of the river below. And for a moment there was only them, two people bound by pasts, choices, and an invisible thread neither fully understood. "You are not what I expected," Lucian said quietly. "And you are not what I feared," she replied. The city seemed to hold its breath as their eyes met, a silent understanding passing between them. Danger, power, and past wounds surrounded them, but so did something unexpected, a fragile spark of trust, curiosity, and the beginning of something neither dared to name. And then, from the shadows, a movement, a figure watching them unseen. Lucian's hand went to his side instinctively, ready. Alara's breath caught, sensing the danger before it arrived. The city was not done with them yet, and the night held secrets that would not remain buried for long. Lucian turned slightly, his sharp eyes scanning the shadows. "You are clever," he said, "but not clever enough." Alara felt a shiver run down her spine, not from fear but from anticipation. They were stepping into the unknown together, bound by circumstance, courage, and a strange, undeniable pull. The night whispered promises, warnings, and possibilities. And as the wind swept across the river, carrying the scent of rain and stone, both knew the game had only just begun. The night air hung heavy with tension, the river beneath the old bridge reflecting shards of moonlight that danced on the rippling water. Alara and Lucian stood close, their movements cautious, aware of the shadows that clung to the edges of the stone structure. The encounter earlier had left them shaken, yet strangely united by something unspoken. Lucian's sharp eyes scanned the darkness. His instincts, honed over years of power and danger, warned him that someone was watching, plotting, waiting for a misstep. Alara noticed his slight tension, the subtle tightening of his jaw, the way his hands hovered near the concealed weapon at his side. She could feel the pulse of his energy, and it mirrored her own, a mixture of fear, adrenaline, and curiosity. "You trust too easily," he said finally, his voice low, almost a warning. Alara's eyes met his. "And you don't trust enough," she replied. "We have to work together if we want to survive." Lucian considered her words, the corner of his mouth twitching in what could almost be a smile. "Perhaps," he admitted, "but don't mistake cooperation for friendship. I am not a man who forgives easily." "Nor am I someone who backs down," Alara shot back. For a moment their banter faded, leaving only the sound of the river and the soft whisper of the wind. It was a fragile peace, one built on necessity rather than understanding. Yet beneath it there was a current neither could deny, an invisible thread pulling them together, stronger than reason or caution. They moved along the bridge cautiously, every shadow a potential threat. Lucian kept to the edge, his posture protective yet commanding, while Alara stayed closer to the center, guiding Theo, who clutched her hand tightly. The boy's small presence reminded them both why they could not afford mistakes. "Tell me about the past," Lucian said after a while, breaking the silence. "The reason you came to me." Alara hesitated. Memories she had buried for years surfaced. The nights she had spent wondering why fate had been so cruel, the loss she had endured, and the pain of carrying it alone. "My family suffered because of your father," she said finally, her voice trembling slightly. "I lost everything I loved, and I swore I would protect what mattered most to me. That's Theo." Lucian's expression darkened. The weight of his father's legacy, the mistakes of the past, the betrayals. He had tried to bury them all, but they remained, festering beneath his calm exterior. "I see," he said quietly, "and you blame me for what happened." "Not you exactly," she admitted. "But your family's power, the fear it spreads, it touches everyone, and it hurt people I cared about, people I could not save." Lucian remained silent, the cool night air wrapping around them. He had inherited power and influence, but along with it came a shadow he could never fully escape. Seeing her, hearing her words, stirred something he had long denied, the possibility of redemption, of change, of making right what had once been wrong. "You are brave," he said finally, his voice low. "But bravery is not enough. You must be clever and careful. The world we live in, it does not forgive mistakes." Alara nodded, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. "I know," she replied. "I've been careful my entire life. But there comes a point when you have to risk everything to protect what matters." Lucian studied her closely, the fire in her eyes reminding him of someone he had once known, someone he had lost and could never forget. "You are different," he admitted. "Most people would cower in fear. You face it head on. And most people are not protecting a child," she said gently, glancing at Theo. "I will do whatever it takes." For a brief moment they walked in silence, each lost in thought. The bridge felt endless, a place suspended between the past and the future, between danger and hope. And then, without warning, movement erupted from the shadows. Figures emerged from the darkness, masked, armed, and deliberate in their steps. Lucian's body reacted instinctively, moving in front of Alara and Theo, shielding them. He drew his weapon with fluid precision, a dance of danger and skill honed over years of necessity. "Stay behind me," he commanded, his voice sharp but controlled. Alara's heart pounded, but she did as instructed, her hands gripping Theo tightly. She watched as Lucian moved with grace, a lethal combination of strength and strategy. And yet, even in this moment of danger, there was something captivating about him, a magnetic presence that drew her attention, even as fear threatened to overwhelm her. The masked figures hesitated, clearly wary of Lucian's skill. One stepped forward, voice muffled by a mask. "You shouldn't have come here," it said. Lucian's eyes narrowed. "Neither should you," he replied, his tone calm but dangerous. A tense standoff followed, the night air thick with anticipation. And then, with sudden, precise movements, Lucian disarmed one of the figures, his skill and authority undeniable. The others faltered, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. Alara realized something startling. He was not only powerful, he was bound by a code. He did not harm unnecessarily. He protected, he defended, he acted with intention. And in that moment she understood a truth she had not seen before. Lucian was more than the fearsome legend whispered across the city. He was a man who could change. When the figures finally retreated into the shadows, defeated but unharmed, Lucian lowered his weapon, his chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. He looked at Alara and Theo, his sharp gaze softening. "Are you both unharmed?" "Yes," Alara replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline that still surged through her veins. "Thanks to you." Lucian nodded, though he did not speak further. There was a weight in his silence, a complexity that words could not capture. Theo, emboldened by the end of the immediate danger, tugged at Alara's hand. "Mom, can we go home now?" Alara smiled softly, squeezing his hand. "Yes, my love, let's go home." As they left the bridge, Lucian followed at a careful distance, his mind racing. The night had shown him something he had long avoided, the possibility of trust, of loyalty, and perhaps even redemption. Alara's courage had stirred something inside him, a reminder of the man he might have been before power and fear hardened him. Over the following days, their lives intertwined more deeply. Lucian allowed her glimpses into his world, carefully, strategically. They met in quiet corners, exchanged guarded conversations, and shared moments that neither fully understood. One evening, as they walked through a quiet park, Lucian spoke softly. "You are unlike anyone I have ever known," he said. "You carry your pain with strength, not bitterness. You protect what you love without surrendering yourself. It is remarkable." Alara glanced at him, the moonlight catching the edges of his sharp features. "And you?" she asked quietly. "Do you protect what you love or just what serves your power?" Lucian's expression darkened, a shadow passing over his eyes. "I am learning," he admitted. "Perhaps for the first time, I understand that power alone is not enough. That protection and care and mercy matter too." Alara felt a shiver run down her spine. For the first time, she saw him not as a figure of fear, but as a man wrestling with the weight of his own legacy. A man who could change if only he chose to. Days turned into weeks and their connection deepened. They sparred with words, challenged each other's assumptions, and slowly, without either fully realizing it, began to trust. The city around them remained dangerous, filled with threats and shadows, but in each other they found a fragile sense of hope, a belief that perhaps the past did not have to define them. Then, one night, the danger returned. Theo went missing. Alara awoke to an empty apartment, her heart pounding. Panic surged through her as she called his name, her voice cracking with fear. The room was silent, save for the faint sound of the rain beginning again outside. A note lay on the table, scrawled in hurried, menacing handwriting. "We have what you love. Come alone or never see him again." Alara's hands shook as she read the words. The threat was clear, the stakes higher than ever. And in that moment, she knew she could not face this alone. She needed Lucian, the man who had become her reluctant ally, her protector, the man whose own legacy intertwined with hers in ways neither could escape. She ran to him, finding him in his office, eyes sharp and alert. "Theo is gone," she said, voice trembling. "Someone has taken him." Lucian's face hardened, his mind calculating every possibility, every angle. "Who?" he asked, though he already had his suspicions. "I don't know," she whispered, "but we have to save him. Please help me." Lucian's gaze softened, the storm in his eyes giving way to something rare, something unguarded. "We will save him," he said. "I promise you, we will face this together." And so, under the cover of night, the dance of redemption began. A journey through danger, shadows, and secrets, where trust and courage would be their only weapons, and the bond between them would be tested like never before. The city slept under a blanket of fog, its streets silent except for the occasional echo of distant footsteps. The night was thick with anticipation, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Alara and Lucian moved quickly, their steps echoing softly against the worn cobblestones. Theo's safety was their priority, and neither would falter. Lucian led the way, his sharp eyes scanning every alley, every shadow. He had already calculated the possible paths, the traps, the likely hideouts. Yet even with all his experience, he could not fully anticipate the cunning of those who had dared to take Theo. Ilara walked beside him, her hand brushing lightly against his. She could feel his tension, the coiled energy that spoke of readiness, of control, of an instinct sharpened by years of survival. And she felt her own courage rising, fueled by the desperation to save her son. Fear and determination blended into a single force propelling them forward. "They could be anywhere," she whispered, though her voice carried a note of defiance. Lucian nodded. "Yes, and we must assume they expect us to panic, but we won't. We will be precise, calm, focused." Ilara's eyes softened as she looked at him. Despite the danger, despite the weight of his reputation and the darkness that clung to his past, there was something in him that inspired trust. Something in him that had shifted since their first encounter. The man who had once been a shadow of fear was now a guardian, a partner in a fight that mattered more than power or pride. They reached an abandoned warehouse near the edge of the river, a place cloaked in shadow and the scent of damp wood. Lucian moved silently, gesturing for Ilara to stay behind as he scouted the perimeter. His instincts told him danger was near, yet he also sensed something else, a faint trace of movement, a subtle disturbance that only he could detect. "Ilara," he whispered, turning to her, his voice barely audible, "stay close. Theo could be inside, but there may be others." "Do exactly as I say," she nodded, gripping his arm lightly. "I trust you." He glanced at her, a flicker of something softer passing over his face. "Good, we must be careful, but remember, courage alone is not enough. Strategy, patience, these will save him." With careful precision, they entered the warehouse. Shadows stretched across the walls, creating shapes that seemed alive, shifting as they moved. Every step was deliberate, every sound measured. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of dust and old wood. Suddenly, a movement caught Lucian's eye. A figure darted across the shadows. He moved swiftly, catching the intruder in a hold that left him unable to escape. Ilara's heart pounded as she watched him work with calm authority, his every movement precise and controlled. There was no fear in him, only purpose. "Where is he?" Lucian demanded, his voice low and dangerous. The figure remained silent, defiance etched into every line of his body. Lucian's sharp gaze softened for a brief moment, a quiet acknowledgement of the human beneath the fear and threat. "You will speak," he said, firm but calm, "because your next choice could save a life or destroy it." The figure's resolve wavered, and finally, with a hesitant gesture, he pointed toward a locked room at the far end of the warehouse. Lucian released him, and they moved toward the door with deliberate caution. Ilara's heart leapt as they approached. She could hear the faint sound of a child's voice, the unmistakable voice of Theo. Relief and fear intertwined in her chest. She pushed forward, hands trembling as she reached the door. Lucian opened it carefully, revealing Theo sitting on a wooden crate, safe but anxious. His small face lit up when he saw Ilara. "Mom!" he cried, running into her arms. Tears filled her eyes as she hugged him tightly, feeling the weight of fear and relief mingle in a single moment. "I'm here, my love. You're safe now," she whispered. Lucian watched quietly, a rare softness in his gaze. He had protected many, controlled many, and commanded fear in countless hearts. But this moment, this simple act of reunion, was unlike anything he had experienced. The vulnerability, the love, the raw emotion. It was a glimpse of a life beyond the shadows he had always known. But the danger was not over. As they turned to leave, the warehouse doors creaked, and movement stirred in the shadows. Figures emerged, more numerous than before, blocking their path. Lucian's eyes narrowed. The fight was not yet finished. "Ilara, stay behind me," he instructed, his voice calm but edged with warning. She nodded, gripping Theo's hand tightly. Lucian's presence was a shield, a promise of safety even in the face of overwhelming odds. He moved with precision, disarming and redirecting without unnecessary harm, a dance of skill and strategy honed over years of survival. Ilara realized something profound in that moment. Lucian's power was formidable, yes, but it was guided by choice, by intention, by a desire to protect rather than dominate. The man who had once been a symbol of fear was now a guardian, a partner in redemption. When the last of the assailants fled into the night, Lucian lowered his guard slightly, turning to Ilara and Theo. "Are you both unharmed?" he asked. "Yes," Ilara replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through her. "Thanks to you." Lucian nodded, his sharp features softening. "Good," he said, "but this night is not just about survival. It is about change, about understanding that the past does not have to define us." Ilara looked at him, sensing the depth of his words. "You've changed," she said quietly. "I see it. You could have remained the man you were, but you chose otherwise." Lucian's gaze met hers, a quiet intensity in his eyes. "And you," he said softly, "have shown me that courage and love are stronger than fear. That protection is not weakness, and redemption is always possible." For a moment they stood in silence, the night around them heavy with unspoken words, shared experiences, and the beginnings of trust. Theo tugged at Ilara's hand, and she smiled, feeling the warmth of family, the fragility of life, and the promise of a future they could shape together. They left the warehouse behind, walking through the foggy streets with purpose and newfound hope. Lucian stayed close, vigilant, yet there was a quiet lightness in his movements, a subtle acknowledgement of the change taking root within him. Over the following days, life began to shift. Lucian used his influence not for fear or control, but to protect the city, to guard those who could not protect themselves. Ilara continued her work at the cafe, her bond with him deepening with every careful interaction, every shared glance, every moment of mutual respect and understanding. Theo thrived in this new rhythm, sensing the trust and cooperation that now guided their lives. He smiled more, laughed more, and for the first time felt safe in a world that had often been harsh and unforgiving. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Lucian and Ilara walked along the river, Theo skipping ahead happily. Lucian took her hand, a simple gesture filled with meaning, with trust, and with a quiet acknowledgement of what they had both endured and learned. "You've taught me something," Lucian said softly, his voice carrying the weight of truth. "That power without compassion is meaningless, that fear without love is empty, and that redemption is always possible if we choose it." Ilara smiled, squeezing his hand gently. "And you've taught me," she said, "that courage is not just about facing danger. It's about trusting, forgiving, and choosing to protect what matters, even when it's difficult." They stopped at the edge of the river, watching the water reflect the colors of the sky. Silence enveloped them, but it was a comfortable silence, one filled with understanding, acceptance, and the quiet promise of a future they would build together. Lucian turned to her, his eyes soft and unguarded. "I was frozen once," he said quietly, "by the weight of my past, by fear, by power. But you awakened something in me, something I thought was lost forever." Ilara felt her heart swell. "And I was afraid once," she replied. "Afraid of the world, of the shadows, of losing what I loved. But you showed me that even in darkness there is light, that courage and love can survive if we fight for them." He stepped closer, lifting her hand to his lips in a gesture of reverence and trust. "Then we will face the future together," he said. "No more running, no more fear, only hope and the strength we find in each other." Theo ran up to them, his laughter ringing in the air, breaking the solemnity with pure joy. "Mom, Dad." "Wait," he called, using the word tentatively but with certainty, and both Ilara and Lucian felt a warmth that transcended words, a bond formed not just by blood, but by choice, courage, and love. As they walked home, the city lights reflecting in the river, the rain returned softly, gentle and cleansing. It was a night of endings, yes, but also beginnings. A story of redemption, trust, and transformation that neither would ever forget. The shadows that had once threatened them now seemed distant, and the bond they shared shone brighter than any danger or fear. Together, they had faced the storm, confronted the past, and discovered that even in a world of darkness, light could be found, nurtured, and shared. And as the rain fell, soft and silver, Lucian whispered to Alara, "You saved me in ways I never thought possible, and now together we can save the world we want to live in." Alara looked at him, her eyes filled with trust, gratitude, and a quiet joy. "Yes," she said softly. Together, the city breathed around them, the night alive with possibility. And for the first time in years, fear had no place in their hearts, only hope, love, and the promise of a future they would shape together.